Shalom and welcome to the Heartland Connection. This is Zach Waller, the Executive Director of Hayuvel, your host, coming to you guys straight from the Heartland of Israel. So the summer trip, is still happening, having a really impacting time here in the Heartland of Israel. There's just so much to soak in here and to understand, and so much biblical history. And then, modern history, and then trying to put those two together and all those things. It's just really incredible. And actually a kind of recent development is that the government of Israel, through the Shomron Regional Council, the Sumerian Regional Council here in our area, has actually provided some educational resources for Hayuvel and partnered with us to educate our volunteers as ambassadors. So we actually have educated spokespeople, educators coming here and educating our volunteers, helping them to be ambassadors, teaching them about what exactly is the BDS. We had a really amazing guy come out and talk about a factory that he has here in the West Bank, right in Samaria, and how he employs Jews and Palestinians and Israeli Arabs, and all these people all work together, and they've never had an issue there. They all work together in peace, and so these kind of stories need to get out there, that Israel is actually helping everybody in the region get jobs and experience life here in Israel, and have a much better standard of living than in the Arab countries surrounding. So, the Jewish people being here is helping everyone, including the Palestinians, making a better life for them. And you just don't hear that anywhere else. But there's a whole 160 factories or something like that in Bar Khan, and it's just really incredible to hear his story. So people like that, talking about the history of the Middle East and the modern state of Israel and all these things. So it's really exciting that the government of Israel is now partnering with us to educate our volunteers, and because we really want these guys to go back to their home countries as educated ambassadors for Israel, to tell the truth of what's going on here. So super exciting. So the summer trip's going great, and the Sons of Zion program has kicked off. We got several guys here, just really amazing young men, just so sold out and yearning to grow in their relationship with God and understand more about this whole Israel thing, and very just hardworking young men that have come here to bless and serve the nation of Israel. And I can already see just the few weeks they've been here, that they are just soaking it all in and really maturing in God and in these things while they're here. So it's really amazing thing. I wanted to mention something because I think this is really important, that a lot of the Christian world is not very connected to. About a week and a half ago, almost 2 weeks ago, there was a fast day that the Jewish people observe called the Fast of Tammuz. That was on the 1st of July. And that day, and for the next 3 weeks after that, up until July 22nd, leading up to what's called the 9th of Av, the 9th day of the Hebrew month of Av, Tisha B'Av in Hebrew, is a 3-week time period of mourning for the Jewish people. And it's kind of interesting that a country would have dates set for times of mourning, but it shows how serious they are about these things. I was just thinking, what U.S. holiday do we have where we mourn about something bad that happened? All of our holidays are joyful and happy and celebrations about something good that happened. But the Jewish people will also remember the tragedies that have happened. And I think there's something really significant about that it's important for us to remember even the hard times that we've gone through. Most of the times, those hard times are where we learn the most, just in our journey, in our daily lives. Excuse me. So this 3 weeks is a time of mourning relating to the loss of the Holy Temple. So Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of the month of Av, is, and they observe this every year, it's a day of mourning where they remember the tragedies that have happened, that have befallen the Jewish people throughout the centuries. And it's really crazy how many different things have happened. I went to, there's a website called Hebrew for Christians, and it's got a lot of really good information. They had an article on Tisha B'Av, and it listed out these different things. So I encourage you to check out that website. But the different things that happened, number one, they say that on the 9th of Av is when Hashem, the Lord, decreed that the original generation rescued from Egypt would die out in the desert and be deprived from entering the promised land because of the sin of the spies. So it was on that day that judgment was passed, that there was going to be another 40 years in the desert. And then it was also the date of the destruction of the first temple from the Babylonians in 586 BC. And then we have also on the same day, the 9th of Av, the destruction of the second temple by the Romans in 70 AD. It's also the date in 135 AD when the Jews rebelled against Roman rule under the false Messiah Shimon Bar Kokhba and were destroyed by Hadrian in the battle at Beitar. So another horrible massacre that happened to the Jewish people. And then also in the Gemara, it talks about how Turnus Rufus, a Roman officer, plowed the area of the temple under. And Rambam, Maimonides, added that all the homes in Jerusalem were likewise plowed under at this time. So just like total devastation. Also, the sixth thing is the expulsion of the Jews from England in 1290. And then the seventh is the expulsion of the Jews from Spain in 1492. So like each one of these huge, horrible things, tragedies that happened to the Jewish people happened on the 9th of Av, the Jewish month of Av, according to the Hebrew calendar. The 9th day is when all these horrible things. So the Jewish people decided, okay, we need to observe this day as a day of mourning, to mourn all those things that happened. And then, as the prophets talk about, look forward to the day when these fast days turn into days of mourning, or of joy, turn from mourning to joy. So just a little bit about what the Jewish people do during these 9 days. Let's see, reading from the Hebrew for Christians website, it says, during the final 9 days of the 3 weeks of sorrow, beginning with Rosh Chodesh Av, the first day of the month of Av, and ending on Tisha B'Av. So there's like 3 weeks, and there's like the final 9 days, right? So on that last week, observant Jews will begin emotionally preparing for the fast of Av. Typically, marriages are not held during this time. There's no weddings, and many Jews deliberately refrain from ostensible, pleasurable activities such as listening to music, dancing, taking vacations, and sometimes even shaving. In fact, most Orthodox Jews will refrain from any activity that might require the recitation of the Shehechianu blessing. So usually they would say that Shehechianu when something new happens, when something good happens, and so anything that they would have to recite that for, they would not do. So it's a pretty serious day of mourning. So I just wanted to talk about this because I think it's really important for us to remember this downfall of the temple. For us, it's like, it was this Jewish place of worship, and we're not really super connected to it as Christianity as a whole. But I think it's so important for us to realize that God's presence dwelt in that place, in that house. King David talks about in the Psalms, one day in your courts, dwell in your house forever. All these about the house, about God's presence, and he's talking about the holy temple. This thing that he knew that he wanted to build, right, and that his son King Solomon was able to build there in Jerusalem. And so this place where God's presence is was destroyed. Like it had God's presence left, and then the temple was destroyed. The offerings that God had commanded to take place were ceased. All these things that enabled God's presence to dwell on earth were taken away. And so we need to recognize that. That's a big deal, God's presence leaving the earth. And, this is a huge part of what I believe Yeshua was talking about when he says, on earth, let your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven, is this connection between heaven and earth, that to bring God's will, his presence down to earth. And so this destruction of the temple is when that was lost. And right before the temple was destroyed, and then the temple being destroyed was like the culmination of all of the horrific things that had happened, the wickedness that was going on. And so we need to yearn and long for the day when the temple will be rebuilt and God's presence will dwell again in Jerusalem. And I think we're just so disconnected from that thought and that idea that the temple in Jerusalem would need to be rebuilt. In Christianity, we've got all these reasons why. I actually talked about this in my other podcast. I won't go into it now, but the podcast called Pro-Temple Christianity. I encourage you to look that up if you're interested and you missed that one. But I just talked about how important it is for us to be pro-temple, that we want God's presence to return to the earth. Okay, so getting into the Torah portion, we've actually got a double portion this week. We have Matot and Masei. Matot means tribes, and actually literally in Hebrew it actually means staves, like a staff. And so it's like symbolizing the leader of the tribe, right? So the tribes, the head of the tribes, staffs. And then Masei means journeys. It's interesting that, as I mentioned, the word for tribe and staff are similar, and I was doing a little bit of study on this. I don't have too much time to go into it, but one thing was saying that of all the characters in the Bible who carried a staff, only Moshe's staff is called a Matot in Hebrew, because he held a certain degree of authority unparalleled by any other Jewish leader on account of his dual role as prophet and king. I thought that was really interesting. So Moshe, when they referred to Moshe's staff, they called it a Matot, and in other people's staffs or staves, they called it Mate, or that the Mate is Moshe's, and then Shevet is the other word. So a lot of times the word Shevet is used, and then Mate is used for Moshe's staff, and then that's the word they're using here. Matot is the plural of Mate for tribes. So it's kind of fascinating. I encourage you to look those two words up and do a little bit of study on it. Then we go into vows, and this is a really, really interesting thing here, and definitely some big questions come up here, like how come all the focus is on a woman making the vow, and how can a husband cancel the vow? Definitely goes against a lot of the feminist cultural views, about how a woman has the same as a man, all these things. And biblically here, it doesn't seem like that's the case. That the man carries the responsibility for the home, and we see that here. And I actually talk about this more in a podcast called Family Functionality in the 21st Century. I'd encourage you to go take a listen to that. And then last year I talked a lot about this whole vow thing and related it to Jacob, and how he was the first person to make a vow. So I encourage you also to listen to that one. Speak Well and Build the Land is the name of that podcast if you're interested in more about this whole vow subject and how it works and what the Bible has to say about making vows. What I want to focus in on here is just the emphasis on words. Like, when I read through this, I'm just like, wow, there is such a powerful thing here of words. Like, if a man makes a vow, if words come out of his mouth that says I will do this, then like there's no room for anything to change. Like this guy is committed to keeping that. And it seems like just generally in the Bible there's such a lot bigger emphasis on words that are spoken. We have Jacob giving his blessing to his children, and then his father Isaac giving his blessing to Jacob, and then Esau coming in and saying, can I have a blessing? And Jacob's like, or Isaac is like, I already gave it to Jacob. So these words that are spoken are so powerful, and I think we're really missing out on the reality. We're naive about the reality of what our words do in this world. There's a lot of scriptures about words too, and I think it's so important for us to take a look at this and be really, really careful with our words. In Ecclesiastes chapter 5, it says, "Be not rash with your mouth, nor let your heart be hasty to utter a word before God. For God is in heaven, and you are on earth. Therefore let your words be few. For a dream comes with much busyness, and a fool's voice with many words. When you vow a vow to God, do not delay paying it, for he has no pleasure in fools. Pay what you vow. It is better that you should not vow than that you should vow and not pay. Let not your mouth lead you into sin, and do not say before the messenger that it was a mistake. Why should God be angry at your voice and destroy the work of your hands? So yeah, there's a pretty serious emphasis on words going on here. Proverbs chapter 10, verse 19 says, when words are many, transgression is not lacking, but whoever restrains his lips is prudent. So, this is pretty straightforward. We need to be so careful with our speech. Matthew chapter 12, verse 36 says, I tell you, on the day of judgment, people will give account for every careless word they speak. For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned. Wow, talk about pretty straightforward and powerful. James chapter 1, verse 19. Know this, my beloved brothers, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger, for the anger of man does not produce the righteousness that God requires. And then in Psalm chapter 15, it's really interesting here. We have King David emphasizing how important our words are to God, and especially our promises that we make. And we see here in this chapter that like one of the requirements of living and abiding in God's presence is to be careful with our words. So, Lord, who may abide in your tabernacle? Who may dwell in your holy hill? He who walks uprightly and works righteousness and speaks the truth in his heart. He who does not backbite with his tongue, nor does evil to his neighbor, nor does he take up a reproach against his friend, in whose eyes a vile person is despised, but he honors those who fear the Lord. He who swears to his own hurt and does not change. He who does not put out his money at usury, nor does he take a bribe against the innocent. He who does these things shall never be moved. So there's 10 things here that it lists out that you have to do in order to dwell in God's holy hill and abide in his tabernacle. And 3 of the 10 are about speech, or about words. And I think this is really, really critical. Something that we don't need to just let slide by. Oh yeah, we know words can hurt, are powerful. And, James has a lot more to say about it in the book of James. But I think for us, we need to really be serious about this. It's something that we need to be super, super, super careful about. And I think, one reason why it's so critical is because in relationships with people, it's so easy to get offended. And most of the time it's because of something that somebody said, right? Somebody says something, and then somebody, maybe it is somebody trying to tell you that they were offended at something or that something hurt them. And usually, instead of, hearing that little piece of what they said, you hear a whole ton of other things. Instead of just hearing somebody say, when somebody's trying to tell you and they say, oh, when you said that, it hurt me or it made me feel this way. The person hears, oh, you're crazy, you're stupid, you're no good for nothing, you should never say a word again in your life. And we just blow things up. And so offense is so dangerous, because then what happens is that person gets offended and then he responds, and then that's taken way out of context and communicated more than what's being said. And body language gets involved and all these things, and it just gets blown up and blown up and blown up, bigger and bigger and bigger. And I like to say the ball is just spiraling down fast. And I like to say, we got to knock that ball back up somehow and get us going back in the right direction, because there's just so much, it just gives the enemy so much room to throw lies at you and things that aren't even true. And I saw a scripture in Proverbs I thought was really powerful. In Proverbs chapter 19, verse 11, it says, the discretion of a man makes him slow to anger, and his glory is to overlook a transgression. And I thought, wow, if we could just be able to, even if we feel like somebody's saying that we did something wrong or being hurting us, if we could overlook that, it's his glory to overlook the transgression too. Obviously, we need to deal with certain things, right? We need to talk through things. We don't want to close things in, but to be slow to anger and to overlook transgression. Right here, King Solomon, King Shlomo, says it's his glory to overlook a transgression, not to be so focused on what the other person did, because that's what we do, right? We say, "Oh, you did," instead of saying, "Oh, what did I do to contribute to this problem in this place that we're in right now. So we need to, I think, be very, very careful. And a lot of times words are the start of this whole thing. In Acts 24, verse 16, Paul says, and he's given his response to Felix, I believe it is. He says, I myself always strive to have a conscience without offense toward God and man. So trying to keep, without having a offense toward God and men. This is really, really important. And will keep us from, lashing back out, speaking things that aren't good. Philippians 1, verse 9 says, "In this I pray that your love may abound still more and more in knowledge and all discernment, that you may approve the things that are excellent, that you may be sincere and without offense till the day of Messiah, being filled with the fruits of righteousness, which are by Yeshua Messiah, to the glory and praise of God." So somehow we have to figure out how to be without offense, how to relate to people, have a relationship with people, and when they do something that's harmful, not to get offended and hear, if they're speaking an inch, not hearing 10 miles worth of, things that aren't even true. And I think it really goes back to just giving someone the benefit of the doubt, right? So when that person comes and says or does or communicates through body language something that they're feeling, and even though they only intend to communicate an inch, you're hearing that 10 miles. Person A is trying to mention that maybe person B shouldn't have said something. Then person B gets offended and feels like person A is saying that they're all these horrible things and unable to communicate well. And it's just crazy how far it goes sometimes. And I think it's a real trick. It takes a lot of humility to effectively communicate, to be able to not be offended and then come back and say, okay, wait, is this what you were saying? And there's several things online that you can find that lay out some good healthy protocol for how to deal with conflict resolution. And I think so many of us we just go at it because we think, oh, it'll be fine. I don't really need to study about this or figure out how to keep my speech where it's proper and good and holy. I love my wife or husband or whatever situation it is, child, father, whatever, friend. And I'll be able to handle this okay. But we need to be really, really careful with this. This is something that's so, so important. And it's definitely something that I've learned a lot from the Jewish people. They talk a lot about. There's a guy who wrote a book, the Chofetz Chaim, and I would encourage you to take a look at that book. It's got some really, really interesting things, just to put this on the radar of what it does when you say certain things, or when you communicate a certain way, or when you speak evil about someone. That's, the Jewish people call it lashon hara, the evil tongue or evil speech. And it's so critical that we don't speak evil of people. It's more damaging than I think any of us really realize, especially from Western culture, where we're like, so arrogant and independent. We're like, oh, sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. And it's like, well, actually, words actually do have a lot of power, and maybe that's not exactly true. So I think it's something we need to really, really look at. There's also a book, I believe it's called the 30-day, or maybe it's 40-day word fast. I'd also encourage you to take a look at that one. It's really good on this topic. So the rest of the Torah portion, we've got the battle against Midian, and this whole thing of the women being saved, and then Moshe saying, why did you save these women? These women are the ones who led Israel to sin, and then they're ordered to kill them. And it's like, whoa, this is so intense and crazy. And again, going back to this whole devastation of sexual immorality and how devastating this is to everyone. It's just so crazy, and another huge thing that we have to be on guard for. And obviously I've talked about that in some other of the podcasts. So there's so much more in this double portion. I'm not going to have time to get into any more of it, but we finished the book of Numbers. So chazak, v'nid chasek, be strong, and may we be strengthened. Thanks for listening, and Shabbat Shalom from the beautiful, exceedingly good land of Israel.